For joining us. My name's Marty. I'm with Columbia College Chicago Admissions. I am one of the assistant directors there. I'm also a proud graduate of Columbia College Chicago. I was a music major, and in my former life, I was a full-time musician. I've been with Columbia for about 6 years now, and am mostly living in California at the moment, in Southern California, but I do travel to many other states as well for my job. So thanks for spending some time with us. Most importantly, I hope you're staying well, you're staying safe, staying active, and staying inspired. And I have the awesome privilege to once again be joined by one of my favorite humans in the whole wide world, Amy Mitchell.
Marty and I adore each other, so we always love when we get to present together. So my name's Amy Mitchell. I'm with Emerson College, and have been with Emerson. I think I'm coming up on my 5th year now, which is kind of crazy. I am based in Southern California in Orange County, right in Anaheim. So right here and available with anything that you guys need. Oh, same to you, Myra. So we are thrilled to be here with you guys today. And then Marty, are you going to share your screen
Yep.
for the presentation? I think that's our next step. So we can jump right into, this is a pretty convoluted presentation, and we want to make sure you guys are getting all the information that you possibly need. That we list some of the majors that we offer. Not all art schools offer the same majors. And so that's something to kind of pay attention to as you're looking for different art schools. I think Columbia College Chicago is one of the schools that literally offers just about every art major you could ever imagine. And Emerson tends to be a little bit more specific in having more just a handful of majors in the arts. So let's dive into, where do you start? And what kind of the things that we'll be going through today. This is some of what we're going to spend some time talking about today. We're going to talk about the different kinds of degrees that you can get, and we're going to use the term arts loosely. So when you hear me saying arts, realize that I'm covering the gamut of all sorts of different kinds of arts. It's just we don't want to spend the time saying 200 majors every time. So really it is the gamut of all art. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of degrees, the different kinds of schools and colleges that you can study, because it's not quite as cut and dry as maybe going to be a psychology major. Accreditation, all the different kinds of things that you're going to need. And then we'll definitely do a deep dive into auditions and portfolio review as well. So this is one of the things that I like to talk about, a breakdown of the different ways that you can study the arts, because there are a pretty wide range of opportunities of ways that you can study. And we just list a couple of schools so you have an idea of what some of these schools are. So I always talk about art schools as being sort of when you close your eyes and someone says, I'm going to art school, and you visualize students with rainbow colored hair on the quad playing guitar and painting on their easel. That is not such a far off picture of kind of what an art school can be like. In the sense of an art school, the focus is really on you solely as an artist. It is on you sort of doing a deeper dive into finding your voice as an artist. And it really is kind of 4 years of, in a way, of kind of a protected environment where you're really just being able to focus on your art. Liberal arts colleges, which is what both Marty and I kind of consider ourselves, are definitely the places that we want you to find your voice. We want you to spend a lot of time focusing on who you are as an artist, but we think that an important piece of that puzzle of finding your voice is really that deeper holistic education. So having a sense of some math, having a sense of some history, having a sense of the world at large so that it can inform your art in a deeper way. And so liberal arts colleges will really be that sort of piece of the puzzle where you're still getting that deep dive into your arts, but also into being educated as an entire human being as a whole. And then there are a couple of different options of studying at a university. So there are, of course, just going to a larger university and getting a degree in the arts. I always tell students to be a little thoughtful of that if that's your choice and they don't have a college that's specifically dedicated to the arts or the art form that you're looking at. And I say that because arts often tend to be underfunded at larger universities. So sometimes you'll see that that is sort of the rickety building that's falling apart that's just sort of there. and maybe not really a main focus and not super funded. Where larger universities that dedicate a specific college or school to the arts or an art form, that means they're really putting their money where their mouth is. And so if you're looking for that larger university sort of environment and that more traditional kind of big football school environment, it might be worth looking at a university that has a college that's specifically dedicated to it. Conservatories are kind of what you think about when you think about that top tier training. They tend to be very competitive, very cutthroat kind of environments, some of the highest technical training that you can possibly get, and also really expensive. So they do tend to be pretty generous with scholarships, but they're hard to get into. And so if you are looking at conservatory style, conservatories as options, you want to cast a wide net because they are very, very competitive as well. Then we sort of have this whole other section of VOTEC, technical schools, and proprietary schools. So the first thing I like to talk about is proprietary schools, which means that they are for-profit colleges rather than nonprofit colleges. What that means is that those schools are run more like a corporation or a business. They are looking to create a profit, not to give that back to the students. We're nonprofit students. If any income is earned over what is needed to operate, that goes directly back into the students in a number of ways. Large tuition discounts, it goes into equipment, into building better dorms. Where proprietary schools, really their focus is about earning money and not giving that back to the students. It's often hard to tell the difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit institution, and that's because the for-profit institutions, one of their largest budget expenses is on marketing, and they tend to be very slick at marketing and very competitive at the way that they market those schools, and they look like a traditional regular nonprofit school. So you want to be really thoughtful and ask some of those questions, and one of the easiest questions you can ask is, are you a nonprofit institution? VOTEC and technical schools are also can be a little bit tricky because those are schools that they often will say that you're earning a college degree, but it is not a fully accredited college degree. So that, and we'll talk in a second about accreditation and do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. But that means that you are often earning a piece of paper, but it is a piece of paper that does not open the same doors that a traditional accredited college degree does. So that means that you cannot go to grad school because you technically didn't get an undergrad degree. It's tricky if you try to apply to a job that requires an undergrad degree because technically you didn't earn an accredited undergrad degree. If you spend a year there and it's really expensive and you don't like it, you lost that year's worth of classes because those classes will not transfer with you because, again, it's a non-accredited program. So again, they tend to spend a lot of money on marketing, and it is often very hard to distinguish a school that is a non-accredited school with another. So we'll talk and I'll save this point, but we'll talk. I think we'll just jump to accreditation and talk about that. So the big question that you want to ask when you're going to some of these schools is, if you are trying to figure out if they're accredited or not, is the first question you can ask is, are you accredited? These are the accrediting agencies that are listed here that are what you want to look for. Anything that is not sort of on this list, and under the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, there's actually 6 regional sectors depending on what region you're looking at. If it's not one of these within this sort of list, then the accreditation doesn't matter. So often you can ask by, are you accredited? And they will usually give 1 or 2 answers if they're not accredited. One of the most famous answers is, we're not right now, but we're going to be soon. We promise we will be by the time you graduate. There's nothing to hold them to that. So be wary if you hear that. The other is, yes, we're accredited. And they sure hope you don't ask the follow-up question, which is, by whom are you accredited? And that is what the next question you want to ask. And then you can see if it's in one of these sort of agencies that you're seeing here. It should be something that's fairly easy to find. If it's not easy to find if a school is accredited, I would be wary of that for sure. Something to kind of think about. So just put that in the back of your mind, and we're going to jump to art school philosophies. So one of the things that I think is important to think about is the way that you learn best, the thing that makes the most sense for you, and when we kind of talk about fit, I think this becomes even a more important conversation as we're looking at art schools. And there tend to sort of be three main approaches to the way that art schools teach their students. And I think this is something that students don't think about as often. And, you know, a lot of what's happening in an art school is that you are finding your voice as an artist. And so this connecting with the faculty, making sure that what the way that you're learning makes sense for you is incredibly important. So there are schools that tend to have a more conceptual approach. So that means that they are more focused on sort of the research behind the art form, studying the history behind it, the research, the thought process behind it, maybe what it is that you're thinking about, the philosophy behind the work you're making rather than the actual work itself. That doesn't mean you're not making work, but it means that you're probably going to spend an equal amount of your time doing research and really studying sort of that conceptual thought process. So, you know, I always, there's a number of examples. I'll use this example because Marty's a musician, so I think he'll appreciate this example. I was at a gallery opening one day, and there was a band there that was playing, and they were making the worst sounds you could possibly hear, and people were just stepping back further and further away and getting away from it. And it turned out they were actually a conceptual band, and their whole goal was to make the most unnerving noises they could possibly make. So they spent a lot of time in the thought process behind their work rather than, you know, spending the time on technique, though I guess you could argue that takes a lot of technique as well. So you want to see if that sounds exciting to you, if the idea of doing a deep dive into research and spending time really kind of building that base sounds exciting to you, you might lean more towards a conceptual approach. Other schools sort of go the opposite direction, where they tend to emphasize more technique. So these are schools that have really developed a very strong sense of style, a really strong sense of technique. You often see this in graphic design and some of those sorts of programs. And they're really spending that time studying that technique because they have an approach that they know works, that they know looks good. That can be frustrating for students that really have a unique sense of voice and are kind of looking to find their unique voice. More schools than not, and this is I think true of both Columbia and Emerson, really want you to have a foot in both of those worlds, which is that we want you to think about your work. We want you to have some sense of the history and thought process behind your work, but we also care that you have the technique and that you kind of find a way to merge those together, and that's probably more common than not. All right, so the other thing that you kind of run into when you're looking at studying the arts is you get a few more options in looking at degree opportunities. So, and a lot of times students will ask, what in the world is the difference between a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a Bachelor's of Music, or a Bachelor's of Arts degree? And this sort of tends to break it down in a little bit of an easier way to think about, which is that a Bachelor of Fine Arts or a Bachelor's of Music degree is that much more specific. So that means that instead of spending 2/3 of your time on the liberal arts courses, you're spending that amount of time on courses in your major. So you really are spending more time. You don't have room for as many as elective credits. You don't have room often for as many minors or sometimes even a minor at all. It's much trickier I'm sure we'll get a lot of conversations about double majors, and that can be a little trickier with a BFA or a BM degree. It just sort of depends. But it really is much more about doing that deeper dive into what it is that you want to study. It tends to be even more deeply hands-on. You're definitely focused on kind of that more professional focus. Though still a BA degree can be definitely focused on the professional focus. I think it really depends. A lot of times students will ask, gosh, what one should I do? It really depends on your major. It depends on what your goal is in life. Depends on, you know, if you are wanting to take a minor or two or be a double major. So that's probably a question to ask is the schools that you're looking at, and also spend some time chatting with your college counselor about that and to see what makes the most sense to you based on what it is that your plans are to study.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at, before we segue into kind of really specific sort of processes to apply to art schools through portfolios and auditions, we want to take a second just to kind of throw out some of the probably most common and most popular majors that you'll find that relate to the arts. everything from digital arts and animation and film, sometimes referred to as fine arts, such as painting and drawing, graphic design, any sort of digital-based design, but things like jazz studies. Students who, like me, studied jazz in particular, and the art of improvisation and working our ears in that genre. But everything as well from costume design, where you're essentially designing fashion, but you're applying it to the theater discipline. Fashion design as well, sculpture, you name it. So to Amy's previous point, a lot of schools will offer something like maybe composition that would be offered as a Bachelor of Arts degree, but also maybe as a Bachelor of Music degree. And so kind of finding the right fit when you're going into these programs and knowing what are the goals and the outcomes that you want as a student, and also then getting really hip to how you apply specifically for these programs. One of our favorite things to talk about in the admissions sphere is the universal answer of it depends. There's always kind of different ways to go about this. There's sometimes always exceptions. And so to sort of preface this next section, the deeper dive of really getting to know the audition and the portfolio requirements, it truly is going to depend. Every school will have a different process, maybe even a different set of requirements to follow. So one thing that we'll probably reiterate a couple times is just to stay organized, keep a list, and sort of keep yourself on track with knowing what is truly required of you when you're applying with a portfolio or an audition, and how that might vary from school to school. So we'll start talking about the visual arts. And for us, we're kind of lumping that together as in like the fine art programs, the design programs, graphic design, if you will, and everything in digital and media arts, from film to television to animation. So the purpose of a portfolio in kind of our eyes in terms of how it fits into the admissions process is this is, I think, the understanding of where we would be teaching you if we welcome you into our programs. It's not a grade. It's not a automatic reason to look to say no to students, but I think we want to understand, if we welcome you to our communities, where we would begin teaching you and what type of work you would be contributing to our school's arts culture. So most students who are applying to art school, you're going to have to submit some type of creative work sample, namely in the form of a portfolio. You also, though, might still be required to submit your essays. Some schools require test scores still. So thinking of kind of the portfolio as an extra piece that you'll be putting together as part of your application materials, but knowing that it will vary from school to school. Portfolios, again, are the way for admissions counselors, but also the faculty members, to really get a sense of where you are in your process. Amy mentioned really being able to talk about your work and understanding the choices that you make in your work. The faculty members want to know that about you. Portfolios should demonstrate a knowledge, this is specifically for visual arts, getting the basics, the foundations such as color theory, composition, looking for themes, or being able to identify and work around themes and projects. So typical requirements for a visual arts portfolio would probably include some observational drawings, still life drawings, figure drawings, etc. One of the things that we hear a lot is that you want to avoid, for your portfolio specifically, is avoid drawing from photographs. Actually do real life observational drawing and include those samples in your portfolio. It might be a mixture of 2D work, but it also might be 3D work. We have students who enter visual arts programs who their primary medium is sculpture. So they're going to include renderings or actual photographs of their 3D work. We also have students who are interested in film. I think Amy and I know that's really popular among California students. So you maybe are not going to be including drawings, but you'll be supplementing your portfolio with things like film reels or edited samples of some of the film work you've done. Some students focus their films in animation. So just kind of knowing it depends what is required of you. Photography students often will submit 10 to 20 images. We have game design students who might, submit their game characters or their storyboard. So just thinking about what is your role in the creative process in putting together the work samples that you can share with the colleges, not only their admissions, but also their faculty members. In general, the visual arts portfolios really do want to see your ability as a diverse artist in terms of your technique, subject matter. We talked about, students who maybe have work that is more media based as opposed to fine art, but a lot of schools might welcome you to submit both. If you are an oil artist, but you also work in, actual photography, we would want to see that work. I think it's important to save your class assignments always, because you never know when you're going to want to fall up on those things. But also knowing that independent projects can also really be an important part of your portfolio. If you're doing work outside of what's required of you, colleges might want to see that. And again, this gets to kind of the point of knowing where your concept is and knowing what your abilities are as a creative. In general, schools want to see between 10 and 20 samples. Film samples, not that long, but you might be, identifying a 3 to 10 minute segment of a film. Maybe it's a short film, so you're sharing the whole thing. And some schools are allowing students to provide direct links to websites. Maybe you have sort of a sample reel on YouTube or Vimeo as well that you can share. So the visual arts portfolios, again, we really want to get to see your diversity as an artist, but also see your technique and your concepts. Some tips for your portfolios. Number one, follow directions and guidelines. This sort of addresses that it depends. But thinking about how you're actually presenting your work. If it's a physical portfolio, you want to make sure that it looks clean and it's organized, that there's not like loose paper falling out of your portfolio. Really take some time to make sure it looks professional and it's a good representation of you. But if it's a digital portfolio, you want to make sure that we can actually see your images. Is your screen brightness up? Are your websites password protected? Are we going to be able to see those things? So really taking your sort of perspective, no pun intended, in the eyes of the viewer to make sure that it's going to look clean and organized, but also accessible. Protect your work. Again, if you're working with a physical portfolio, you want to make sure that it's got appropriate sort of protection and padding. You're not going to be losing pieces of it. Kind of a sage advice, you typically don't want to roll up your artwork. It can smear and smudge and damage the images. As we said, avoid loose sheets of paper between your pieces. If you're mounting your work, this is not always a requirement, but in general, you want to use neutral tone. So grays, blacks, and whites, putting a frame around your work. If your work is maybe a charcoal-based piece, there's fixative that you can sort of secure your work that way. But again, you don't want to be rolling it up. And this is, I think, really important, labeling your pieces with your names, maybe your return address or your high school address, and actually what school you go to. A lot of times we're looking at your work, and if we're really, entranced by it, we don't want to forget what work it is. So tell us who you are. Don't overstate who you are. We want to remember your work. And especially as we kind of do, or we may do some in-person portfolio reviews and experiences, whether it's on campus or at an off-campus event, or maybe when you're at your school. It is, I think, becoming more acceptable to show your work on an iPad more so than an iPhone, something with a little bit more of a larger screen presence. So just some things to keep in mind. I forgot to mention that we're going to be sharing this PowerPoint, so all of this information you'll have with you, but let's kind of segue just one more thing. This is kind of relative to film and media work. Again, follow the direction and guidelines. My biggest advice for film students, colleges are going to focus first on your storytelling abilities way more than your technical aspects. So if you're not getting really into story and understanding how maybe your editing is contributing to that story or your visual effects are contributing to the story, really reposition yourself as a part of the storytelling mechanism, because that's what film programs are all about, is storytelling. We kind of think that it's our job to really teach you the slick and technical aspects. You'll learn that no matter what program you're going into, but we want to know at the heart that you're a good storyteller. Especially for photography students and just, graphic design students, a lot of times colleges want to see your themes. So what I like to say to this is it's not multiple filters on the same image, but maybe your theme revolves around country landscapes, and you've got sort of 6 or 8 images that focus on clearly a country landscape, but then you're supplementing maybe with more urban landscape photography, and you've got 6 or 8 images that sort of represent that. So keeping in mind that as you're going out, whether through class projects or individual projects, you might step back and also identify some themes that you're doing in your work, whether purposely or not. And last but not least, know how to talk about your work. Again, what is the context of your work? Oftentimes, if it's in it like an in-person portfolio review, you're going to be talking with people. So like, know why you made the choices that you made. I like to say, speak with confidence about your work. And of course, save your work and give credit if you're borrowing or repurposing any work legally. So segueing now to performing arts, I'm going to break up specifically just music and dance. And Amy will speak very deeply about theater. So specifically for music and dance auditions, I kind of think about the audition as really understanding where your technical facilities are first and foremost. Colleges, again, I think use the audition to know where you'd be entering our programs. And so we get, and our faculty members obtain a level of understanding of how you would be, again, being a student in our program, but also how you'd be contributing to our ensembles, our dance classes, our groups, etc. So there's going to be some physical activity. Most importantly, if you're auditioning in person, get there early, warm up, stretch, do all those things, find a place to park, grab some water or a beverage beforehand, but plan accordingly for what's actually going to happen in your audition. The audition is typically going to be short. You might not be auditioning for 7 hours. It might be a 10-minute audition. It might be 45 minutes of an audition. So kind of prepare yourself for anything. I know the colleges that do in-person audition, they will absolutely be, sharing a bit of a preview in terms of what you're going to experience. But kind of to preview that, dance auditions will likely include some sort of formal dance, perhaps in genres such as ballet or a modern contemporary style or even jazz. I know at Columbia we have students who maybe they'll do tap work or hip hop work. So kind of, dancing as part of a class in one of those specific genres of dance. But there will also probably be a moment where you'll get to perform a solo piece, whether that's something that you've choreographed yourself or you've learned from another choreographer. But you're going to dance both in a group setting and both as, a solo artist in that sense. Music auditions will absolutely include some sort of performance ability. So thinking about what your instrument is, if it's your voice, you're going to be singing. If you're an alto sax player, you're going to be playing some tunes on your saxophone. Drummers like me, we sat at a drum kit. So the music auditions, though, also really do look at some of those technical foundational skills like scales. So I think devoting some time while you are still in high school to brush up on your major and minor scales, working on ear training exercises. And I shouldn't have saved the best for last, but sight reading. No pressure, but all auditions for music have sight reading. And again, this is not a penalty or a trick, but it's really to understand how we begin teaching you. Music, even though it is such a digital and communicative art form, it really does rely on notation. And so sight reading is just really critical as a foundational skill as you're entering the program, again, for us to see. So music audition tips, in general, you're going to prepare at least two contrasting pieces. This might be sort of a classical piece, but also maybe more of like a pop tune or a rock tune. If you're maybe specifically going into a jazz program, you'll probably play something that's slow, like a ballad, and then maybe something that's a bit brighter, an up-tempo tune. But we want to hear different pieces. Again, not the same piece sped up or slowed down or in a different key, really contrasting styles. This helps the faculty members get to know the breadth of your abilities as a performer. In general, you want to memorize your piece. You might reference a lead sheet or actual sheet music, but you should really know the music that you're performing. And again, knowing how to talk about the work that you're performing. Again, be prepared for scales, arpeggios. You might do some technical studies. Again, be prepared to sight read. I think my biggest piece for this is make sure you take a deep breath before you actually start performing. Look over the piece, know your time signatures. But if you make a mistake, don't stop. We all know mistakes are a part of life. And I think the faculty members are most interested in what you do after you've made your mistake than the mistake itself. And if you are preparing for in-person auditions, You know, if you have somebody who's going to play piano behind your work, make sure that you've got sheet music for them. If you're having a backing track, make sure it's in a compatible format. If it's on your phone, make sure you can play it. If it's like a CD, remember those, make sure they have a CD player, but just be really prepared. And again, colleges will outline this as part of their audition process. In general, you want to practice in front of as many people as possible because that's what you're going to be doing all throughout your time, in music, in photography, in theater, etc. And most importantly, I think know your schools. You know, some schools have very specific music focus. It might be really rooted in classical music, whereas some schools are really focused on a hybrid of both classical and contemporary. And some schools are like, all we care about is modern music. So get to know the programs that you're applying for. And I think prepare your pieces to match what those schools are offering in terms of their focus. Dance, as we said, again, is going to look at a lot of the physical activity. So of course, the auditions will vary, the times will vary, the sort of what you might do will vary, but in general, be prepared for a full dance class audition as well as the solo audition. Faculty are going to look for your rhythm, your coordination, your body structure, and again, the potential to be taught and to learn. So it's not how good your dancing is, it's that too, but they're also going to be looking at how rhythmic are you, how coordinated are you. Similarly to music, knowing how to talk about your work, especially if you're preparing a solo piece, the faculty members are going to love talking with you about why you chose this piece and what it means to you. So really getting to understand some of that concept and context of your work is just really critical, I think, in general for any arts. And similarly to music, knowing if your dance program is really rooted in a classical style or form versus dance programs that do focus more on modern and contemporary. I think you want to show up as prepared as possible for your audition, but you also want to give them really what they're expecting to see. So if it is a school that focuses primarily on ballet performance, you should probably be preparing ballet pieces for your audition. When in doubt, my friends, ask questions. Your admissions reps, but also as you get contact from the actual people who are arranging the auditions, if you have any questions, it's always better to ask and be prepared than show up and not be prepared. So with that, we're going to segue over to the final piece and talk about our favorite discipline, theater. Oh, I think you're muted, Amy. Did I mute you? I'm sorry. Oh no. Give me 1 second. Amy, can you talk a bit?
I got it.
All right, there we go.
There we go. That happened to us yesterday too. We don't know why that is. That's a new Zoom thing. So sorry about that, everybody. But so we're gonna switch gears to theater, which is actually pretty convoluted when you get into the performing arts and theater because there's so many areas that you can go into. So we're gonna talk a little bit about design portfolios and of course auditions as well. So we can. So auditions first. We'll talk first about traditional theater auditions, which typically will include two contrasting monologues for acting students. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those kind of monologues look like. But they tend to be contrasting either in era or style. And there are a lot of things that we want to kind of point out about monologues in general, but I'll jump to that in a second. And then if you are looking at doing design, technical theater, fashion, costume design, anything along that lines, typically you will be including a resume and then a portfolio of your design work. If you are looking at going into a program that has this actually can be true this is all this is all and it depends. Theater is especially and it depends where you really want to reach out to your schools and make sure you understand what the process is because it gets very complicated and it's very different for each schools, for the variety of schools. Some schools for theater and acting and or musical theater may require you to do a pre-screen first. And the way that I always describe a pre-screen, and it probably doesn't sound the nicest way to describe it, is you're auditioning to audition. So you're essentially submitting some sort of pre-audition to see if they will then invite you to apply and audition for the program. It can be any number of things. Musical theater will often ask for just a 1-minute vocal piece and a 2-minute monologue. They're pretty short. They're not as long as your traditional audition would be. Typically, they would be submitted in some kind of video format. And typically it's a month or two before the actual application deadline is due. So you want to pay very close attention to what the requirements are and what the dates are for those requirements, because it can get really tricky. One of the benefits of doing a pre-screen early, some schools will allow you to submit your pre-screen at the same time you submit your application. But the downside of that is you're often paying a fee for the pre-screen, and then you're also paying the application fee, which you will lose if it turns out you weren't actually invited to apply. So the benefit of getting your pre-screen as early is often those fees are less, and you're not paying an application fee, which is often more for a school that you may ultimately not get invited to apply to. And very often at that pre-screen process, they will look at you for both traditional theater and musical theater at the same time. Musical theater programs tend to be smaller and tend to be incredibly competitive, where they may have more room in their traditional theater program and may feel that's a better fit for you. So they may actually invite you to audition for that traditional theater program. For musical theater majors, you're going to get the triple whammy audition, which means you're going to be doing 2 musical selections, typically 1 up-tempo and 1 ballad. And then you'll often be doing a dance class or a dance call of some sort. And then also, of course, your 2 monologues as well. So that is usually what you'll see happening. The requirements are so different for every program. So you really want to, pay attention to what that means. And really be thoughtful of each school. I always suggest creating a spreadsheet, because you want to make sure that you are doing everything early, that you're not missing dates, anything along that lines. Anything for tech, costume set, lighting design, they're going to require portfolios. They're going to want to see your work, and that's going to be really important to them. And then of course your entire requirements may include things like resumes, specific letters of recommendation from people who know you in that field, video or audio, pre-screening, writing samples, headshots, portfolios. There's a whole lot. So you really want to make sure that you're paying careful attention to what those schools are requiring. Some can be mailed in at the same time as the main application. Some need to be mailed in separately. This is actually a point to pay attention to for any arts program, not just for theater, but in particular for theater as well, which is that we often need to get your regular application submitted in our system, which takes sometimes even up to a week, before we can then send you the link to upload an audition or to sign up for audition, or even the link for submitting a portfolio. So students who wait until midnight on the deadline and get it submitted, then send Marty and I 1,000 emails in a panic because they couldn't upload their portfolios or sign up for their audition dates. This is why being early is really important. And in theater, I think that's extra important because they're very competitive programs, and those audition dates actually can fill up. And then you actually can't get an audition slot. So you want to get things in as early as possible, be prepared. Okay, so for your portfolios, this is for anybody who's thinking about doing any sort of design or tech. Couple of things to really think about. You want to save everything that you do, photograph everything that you do. If you're doing set design, get in there and photograph those sets. Make sure that you're taking actual physical pictures of everything that you see. Save actual items if you can. I know it's hard on larger scale things, but if you're a costume designer, save some of those costumes if you can. You really want to be able to prove what you've done, to show everything that you've done. And when you're building that portfolio, it's okay to show, if you want to be a lighting designer, but you've also done some costume design and you've built some set pieces, that's totally fine to include those, but you really want the main focus to be on your area of interest. Make sure things are organized, that you're comfortable talking about your work, explaining why you've made the choices you've made, because an interview will typically be a part of the piece of this puzzle of the application. So be prepared. Be confident, know who you're going to interview with, know where your interview is, true of your audition too, know where you're going, get there early so you can find it. So as I think Marty mentioned earlier, you have time to park, all that stuff. For your actual theater audition, and I think a lot of times students will assume they should pick a crazy dialect and a character that's in their 90s because, boy, I'm really going to show what a great actress or actor I am. But the reality is, for the actual theater audition, they really want to see you at the heart of the actor of who you are. So choose material suitable for your age. Choose an actual true monologue where you're only speaking to one other character. Make sure that you're not sort of getting hung up on trying dialects and things. We really want to just see who you are as an actor at the heart of who you are. Please, please, please be familiar with the entire play and the context of your monologue. A lot of times students are choosing from a book of monologues, and then they'll get asked, but that was an interesting character choice you made based on what happens later in the play, and the student looks like a deer in headlights because they have no idea what happens in the play because they haven't read it. And so you want to be able to be confident about why you've made specific acting choices, and make sure you're making smart acting choices based on what's happening in the entire play. We already talked about signing up early, be prepared, rehearse, 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 memorize, memorize, memorize. One of the things that I've seen happen at auditions is they'll actually stop you and ask you to start in the middle sometimes to see how well you've memorized, because it's easy to memorize from beginning. Well, it's not easy, but it's easier when you're in that pattern. So they'll try to break up that pattern. Make sure you're warming up, breathe, don't rush through it. Give yourself time, be thoughtful and confident and comfortable. The big thing they're looking for is that you're comfortable taking direction. That's one of the things I know Marty mentioned earlier, and I think this is true for all arts majors. One of the things we're really trying to evaluate is your ability to learn, your desire to learn. Not that you're coming to an audition or to a portfolio review with the attitude that you already know everything because you've been the lead in every school play, and so you don't need anybody to help you. Then you're not really there to learn. So what's the point of your education? So be prepared to take direction, listen, know that the people that are auditioning you are the same faculty that will often be teaching you. So that's what they're trying to get a sense of. All right, so a couple of important dates to keep in mind. So National Portfolio Day, I know, and I see that we've got a list of questions, so we're gonna make sure we get a chance to jump into those as well. But I know one of them was asking about how do you get your portfolio reviewed. National Portfolio Day is one of the great days to do that, which is literally a day where you can go and get all your portfolios reviewed by a number of colleges. So if you're wanting to know when those portfolio review days are, you can log on to that website and check it out and see when those are happening. And then Unified Auditions is sort of the same thing, but for theater. So it's a chance where students can go in and do a number of their theater and musical theater auditions in one place. It's usually the second weekend in February. The LA one is by the Marriott by LAX. And then there's one in Chicago, New York, and a smaller one in Las Vegas as well. Those slots really fill up. So again, this is why it's important to apply early, get things in early. And then as you're starting to build your college list, the performing and visual arts fairs are a great place to do that, where you'll see a bunch of us schools all in one place and a chance to kind of get to know and ask some of these really important questions and get to know good fit schools for you as you build your list. Emerson is what I often call a best of both worlds school, because it is a small school, only about 3,800 students, but right in the heart of a city. So we're in the theater district in Boston. Actually, I'm sitting in the virtual background of one of Emerson's theaters. We have 8 theaters on campus. And so we are right in that heart of this historic theater district. Campus itself is urban, but teeny tiny urban, only about 2 blocks long. So it is actually this small kind of unique place. Our focus in all of our majors is only on communications and the arts. So we are really dedicated to those particular fields. We have a pretty wide range of options. And we are building a number of global programs as well now. So we actually have a really cool experimental film program in conjunction with Paris College of Arts, an international political relations program in conjunction with Franklin College in Switzerland. We own our own castle in the Netherlands, so students can study in the Netherlands as well. We have a beautiful campus in LA that students can live in and do pretty intense internships in. So pretty much anything in our specific art forms, theater, film, creative writing, business of arts, comedy, anything along those lines we are incredibly well known for. And then of course, anything in communications. We're #1 in journalism, anything along those programs as well. Oh, and someone just said the castle is breathtaking. It is, the castle is very cool. So, so anyhow, and we'll be around to answer more questions, and you guys will have our contact info as well.
Love it. Columbia is just like Emerson, except we don't have a castle. um, we have a few more buildings, and we have the Sears Tower in Chicago. So we have around 7,000 students in total. And some of our programs are a little bit more available at Columbia. You know, we have programs in things like fashion design and things like music business management. And so, you know, our programs are so very similar. Our college is also totally a liberal arts college. I think one of the things that we've been really intentional about in recent years is making sure that in addition to students studying, you know, how to become great writers and public speakers, business skills are really important. So we're teaching students how they file taxes, things like intellectual property rights and copyright law, but also spending a lot of time in students' upper years to talk about how technology is really a part of their creative industries. Things like using LinkedIn to find jobs and internships. You know, we're really embedding that in our core curriculum approach. Chicago is a larger city than Boston. It's currently the third largest city, but similar to Emerson, you know, we're in one neighborhood in a big city, and so we kind of take up space in that one particular neighborhood. But I think a student who's going to school in Boston or going to school in Chicago or going to school in New York City, you know, realize that you have that whole city really to explore as part of your educational experience. And so I know we both really want to preach that our students get experience off campus too, even outside of our neighborhoods, as part of the education that you'll receive. So we're going to throw up our contact information here. I am going to stop recording